Hey everyone, and welcome back. When we think about ancient history, we always think about, pyramids and emperors and all that, right?
Right.
Well, today we're going way back further to discover some of the very first people to live in the Americas.
Oh, yeah. This is way before the Inca.
Exactly. And to help us go back in time and really understand who these people were, we have archaeologist Dr. Tom Dillahay.
Hi there.
And, to start us off, we're going to be talking about two archaeological sites, Monteverde and then also Huaca Prieta.
Two of my favorites.
Absolutely. And they really challenge how we think about these early people.
They really show how adaptable people were back then, just living in all kinds of different environments from the rainforest all the way to the coast.
So let's start with Monteverde.
Sounds good.
Now, Monteverde is in Chile,
Yes.
and it dates back 13,500 years.
A long time.
It is a long time. And we always hear about how, the first Americans crossed over from Siberia right around 13,000 years ago,
The Clovis first theory?
right? The Clovis first theory. But Monteverde really challenges that.
It really does because, it predates all those Clovis sites by at least 1,500 years. So people had to be down in South America much earlier than we originally thought.
So they were already in South America when the Clovis people were supposedly the first ones here.
Exactly.
Now, what makes Monteverde even more special is how well everything was preserved.
Oh, it really is amazing.
It's like opening a time capsule.
It is. It's like a snapshot of life from thousands of years ago.
So how is everything so well preserved?
Well, a peat bog formed over the site.
Yeah.
And a peat bog, it's kind of like a giant refrigerator.
Okay.
It keeps everything really cold and there's not a lot of oxygen. So things like wood or plants or even leather, they don't rot away like they normally would.
So it's like Mother Nature decided to preserve this site just for us.
Uh-huh. In a way.
Well, what did we find when we opened this time capsule? What do we know about the people who lived at Monteverde?
Well, one of the most interesting discoveries was a big tent-like structure. Yeah, it had big wooden poles that would have held up a roof made of animal hides.
So they weren't just passing through
No, they were staying there a while, maybe even a year or more.
a whole year. For people who were supposed to be nomadic hunter-gatherers.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? They were putting down roots and creating a home.
And they weren't just building homes. They also found a smaller structure that was shaped like a wishbone.
That's right. And inside that structure, we found medicinal plants.
So they were using plants for medicine.
That's what it looks like, yeah.
Wow. What else?
Well, we also found all sorts of tools. Stone points for hunting scrapers, grinding stones, and even some wooden tools.
Wooden tools. I mean, we're talking 14,500 years ago.
I know, it's incredible. They even found digging sticks with bits of wild potato still clinging to them.
Wild potatoes.
Yeah, they were eating potatoes way back then.
So they weren't just hunters, they were gatherers too.
Exactly. And get this, they even found seaweed at Monteverde.
Seaweed.
Yeah, which means they must have been traveling to the coast to get it.
Wow, so they were really familiar with their environment, from the rainforest all the way to the coast.
They really knew how to use everything around them.
Now here's something I've always wondered. If they lived in Monteverde for so long, why haven't we found more human remains?
That's a good question. It's one of the biggest mysteries in archaeology.
Really?
Yeah, because we're finding all this stuff, homes, tools, food, but very few skeletons.
So where are all the people?
Well, there are a few theories. Maybe they cremated their dead.
Oh.
Or maybe they buried them in a way that didn't preserve the bones very well.
Huh. Or maybe...
Or maybe we just haven't found the right places yet, you
Right.
know? Maybe their burial sites are hidden somewhere we haven't looked.
It's kind of spooky, isn't it? We can see what they ate and how they lived, but the people themselves are still a mystery.
It's true. We still have so much to learn about these early Americans.
Well, let's move on from the rainforest and head to the coast.
Okay.
Our next stop is Huaca Prieta in Peru, which is a completely different environment.
Oh yeah, the coast of Peru is very different from the rainforest.
And yet, these people were thriving there too.
They were. It shows just how adaptable they were.
So tell me about Huaca Prieta. What was it like? How did they survive there?
Well, Huaca Prieta dates back to about the same time as Monteverde, around 14,500 years ago.
Okay.
But unlike Monteverde, which was in a rainforest, Huaca Prieta is on the coast in a desert.
A desert.
Well, it wasn't always a desert back then. It was more like a grassland.
Oh.
But still very different from a rainforest.
And the coast means lots of seafood, right?
That's right. We found tons of shark bones, whale bones, and shells at Huaca Prieta.
Wow, so they were fishing.
Oh, yeah. They were really good at it.
But they couldn't have survived on seafood alone, could they?
Probably not. They probably went inland too to hunt and gather other food.
So they were using both the land and the sea.
Exactly. They were taking advantage of all the resources they could find.
And here's the really cool part.
What's that?
They found evidence of avocado squash and chili peppers at Huaca Prieta.
I know, isn't that amazing?
But wait, avocado and chili peppers. We're talking about 10,800 years ago, right? Before agriculture was supposed to have started in the Americas.
That's right. This discovery really changes how we think about early agriculture.
So they weren't just gathering wild plants. They were actually growing them.
It seems that way, yeah. And they might have even been experimenting with different types of plants.
Fascinating. So both Monteverde and Huaca Prieta are showing us that these early people were much more sophisticated than we thought.
Oh, yeah. They were definitely not just simple nomadic hunter-gatherers.
They were adaptable, innovative, and they knew how to use their environment to their advantage.
They really were masters of survival, and they were doing it all thousands of years ago.
It's incredible to think about all that they accomplished and all that we still have to learn about.
It really is. There's still so much out there waiting to be discovered.
Now, speaking of discoveries, new technologies are helping us see the past in a whole new way.
That's right. Things like LIDAR are revolutionizing archaeology.
LIDAR. Tell me more about that.
Well, LIDAR stands for light detection and ranging, and it's basically like X-ray vision for archaeologists.
X-ray vision.
Yeah, it uses lasers to create 3D maps of the ground, and it can even see through dense vegetation.
Wow. So we can see things that are hidden beneath the jungle.
Exactly. We can find ancient structures, roadways, even entire settlements that we never knew existed.
It's like uncovering lost cities.
It really is. And
Oh.
with LIDAR, we're just beginning to scratch the surface of what's out there.
This is a really exciting time to be learning about the past.
I couldn't agree more.
Now, as we start to wrap up our deep dive into the first inhabitants of South America, I want to ask you a big question.
Okay.
What can we learn from these ancient people? I mean, think incredible challenges, right?
They did.
But they also showed amazing ingenuity and resilience. What lessons can we take from their story, especially as we face our own environmental challenges today?
Well, I think one of the biggest lessons is that we need to be adaptable, just like they were. Yeah, they didn't just sit back and let the environment dictate their lives. They figured out how to work with nature.
Yeah.
They understood the plants and animals, the seasons, and they used that knowledge to survive and thrive.
It's like they were the original permaculture experts.
Uh-huh. You could say that.
And I think that's a really important lesson for us today, especially as we face climate change.
Absolutely. We need to learn how to work with nature, not against it, just like they did.
So by studying the past, we can find solutions for the future.
Exactly. The past can teach us so much about how to live sustainably and how to adapt to a changing world.
Now, another question I have is, how did these people even get to South America in the first place? I
Yeah.
mean, we're talking about a time long before maps and boats with motors.
Right.
How did they make such a long and dangerous journey?
Well, the traditional view was that they came from Siberia, crossed the Bering Land Bridge, and then spread south.
Right, the Clovis first theory again.
Exactly. But as we talked about earlier, sites like Monteverde are challenging that theory because they're older than the Clovis sites.
So they had to get to South America even earlier.
Right. And that means there might have been other ways to get here.
So what are some of the other possibilities?
Well, one possibility is that they traveled along the Pacific coast.
By boat?
Maybe. Or maybe they used rafts or even just walked along the shoreline.
Following the coast makes sense.
Yeah.
You always have access to food and water.
And a nice view.
Exactly. But they could have also traveled inland, right?
That's right. Maybe they followed river systems or mountain ranges.
So maybe it wasn't just one migration, but several different groups coming from different directions.
That's a very real possibility. It could have been a much more complex and dynamic process than we originally thought.
Okay, so multiple routes at different groups and a long history of adaptation and innovation.
Exactly. It's a much more interesting story than the old simple wanderer narrative.
Absolutely.
And it shows just how incredible these early South Americans were.
They were pioneers, explorers, and innovators.
And their legacy lives on in the diverse cultures and societies we see across the Americas today.
I think it's amazing that we can learn so much from people who lived thousands of years ago.
Me too. It's like they're still speaking to us through their artifacts and their stories.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for a break.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so we're back, and we've been talking about the first inhabitants of South America and how they were much more complex than we often give them credit for.
Yeah, they were incredibly resourceful and adaptable.
Exactly. And, it makes you wonder what else is out there waiting to be discovered,
Oh, there's so much more to find, I'm sure of it.
especially with all the new technology we have now, like LiDAR.
LiDAR is a game changer. It really is.
I mean, think about it. We can see things hidden beneath the jungle.
I know, it's amazing. We're finding entire settlements that no one even knew existed.
It's like we're just beginning to understand the true scope of their world.
That's right. And it's not just about finding new sites. It's also about reinterpreting the sites we already know about.
How so?
Well, as we learn more about these early people, we can start to see the old sites in a new light.
Okay, I see what you mean.
For example, for a long time, archaeologists thought that the earliest Americans were focused mainly on hunting big game like mammoths and mastodons.
Right.
But now we're realizing that they were actually eating a much wider variety of foods.
Like those wild potatoes we talked about?
Exactly. And not just potatoes, but all sorts of plants, fruits, nuts, seeds, you name it.
So they were really in tune with their environment.
They had to be.
And they were also really good at adapting to different environments.
Oh, yeah. We see that at both Monteverde and Huaca Prieta.
Two completely different environments.
Right. One's a rainforest and the other's a coastal desert.
And yet they thrived in both.
They did. And that's a testament to their ingenuity and adaptability.
Now, one thing I've always been curious about is how did these people get along with each other? I mean, were they peaceful or were they constantly fighting?
Well, that's a tough question to answer
Right.
because we don't have any written records from that time period.
Oh.
So we have to rely on the archaeological evidence.
And what does that evidence tell us?
Well, some sites show evidence of violence, like skeletal remains with injuries or weapons that were clearly used in combat.
Oh, well.
But other sites show evidence of cooperation and trade.
Like what kind of evidence?
Well, for example, we find artifacts from one region showing up in another region hundreds or even thousands of miles away.
So they must have been trading with each other.
That's the most likely explanation.
And that suggests that they weren't always at war.
Right. It suggests that they were capable of peaceful interactions too.
So maybe it was a mix of both.
Probably. Just like in any human society, there were probably times of conflict and times of peace.
Makes sense.
And it's important to remember that these were not monolithic groups.
Yeah.
Meaning that they weren't all the same.
Okay.
There was a lot of diversity among these early Americans, just like there is today.
Diversity in what way?
Well, in terms of their languages, their cultures, their beliefs, their ways of life.
So we shouldn't lump them all together into one big category.
Exactly. They were complex and diverse, just like any other group of people.
It's fascinating to think about all the different ways they lived and interacted with each other.
It really is, and we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of their story.
I'm sure there are many more surprises waiting to be discovered.
Oh, absolutely. And as we continue to learn more, I think we'll find that these early Americans were even more amazing than we ever imagined.
On that note, I think it's time to wrap things up for today.
Okay.
So we've been on this incredible journey exploring the lives of the very first South Americans.
And it's amazing how much we've learned just from two sites.
Right. Monteverde and Huaca Prieta have really changed how we think about these early people.
They really show us that these weren't just simple nomadic hunter-gatherers.
Exactly. They were adaptable, they were innovative, they were connected to their environment in a way that I think we've lost touch with.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can learn from them.
Especially as we face our own environmental challenges today.
Absolutely. They were masters of sustainability.
They had to be right. They didn't have the luxury of just going to the grocery store.
No, they had to rely on their knowledge of the land and the sea to survive.
And they did it for thousands of years.
They did. And they left behind a legacy that we're only just beginning to understand.
And it's a legacy that's worth preserving.
Definitely. These sites are incredibly valuable, not just for archaeologists, but for all of us.
Because they tell us the story of who we are and where we came from.
Exactly. They're a reminder of our shared human history.
And they offer us a glimpse into a way of life that was, in many ways, more sustainable and harmonious than our own.
I think that's a really important point.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage everyone listening to learn more about these fascinating cultures.
Yes, please do.
There are so many resources available online and in libraries.
And don't forget about museums.
Oh yeah, museums are great. You can see the actual artifacts that these people made and used.
It's a really powerful experience.
So get out there and explore and discover the amazing world of the first South Americans.
And keep an open mind because there's still so much we don't know.
That's the beauty of archaeology, right?
Yeah.
There's always something new to learn.
Absolutely. And who knows what incredible discoveries are waiting for us just around the corner.
Well, that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
And remember to stay curious, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.